Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the British Empire Study Group. This is our September 9th meeting. And for those of you who haven't joined us, and this is your first time, we welcome you. And I'd like to introduce up on the top of your screen, if you have everybody up, you'll see Robert Gray, who's my co-chair, and our speaker tonight, Stephen Zirinsky. So usually we tell you a little bit about what philately is. And, we're pretty broad here at the British Empire Study Group. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we basically accept everyone, and we really push the fringes because that's really what it's all about. It's pretty fun here. So we normally meet pre-COVID days, and hopefully very soon, at the Collectors Club in New York City. We have great food, I think, and great times. So I hope if you're ever in New York and you see one of our meetings and we're up there, that you'll come and join us. So I'd like to just announce that our next meeting will be on October 14th, and that will be with Kathy Johnson, talking about Scotland's halfpenny mail coach tax. And I'd like to do just a little housekeeping, if I could, for those of you who are not familiar. If you would, try to put any questions you have in the Q&A button. That's the little button at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A. You really can't miss it. And following the presentation, we will have a lot discussion. So right now, we can't interact with you, but afterwards, we're going to bring you over to to see the presenter, and you could talk to him and ask questions and have a good old time. So at the bottom of the screen, you will see something called transcripts, live transcripts. So if you're a little hard of hearing, you feel free to adjust those. If you're not and you find them obnoxious, then what you need to do is just go to the bottom of your screen, and you'll see it says clicked on the live transcript. It might be under the more key, and then just say hide subtitles, and that will get rid of them if you really find them obnoxious. We do have some people in the audience who are hard of hearing and do appreciate them. So thank you for your understanding. Okay, so now I think that's all the housekeeping rules. If you're interested in any other topic, please feel free to send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm seeing all these great places. We have New Zealand, Raleigh, Australia, and Kuwait even, Robert. So anyway, right now I'm going to turn this over to Robert Gray, who's going to introduce tonight's speaker.
Well, thank you, Joan. It's my pleasure actually to introduce Steve. I've known him for several years now. Steve's story of how he got started is his father dumped 10,000 stamps on him when he was 10 years old or so, and said, sort these. And he's been with the hobby now for more than 5 decades. We'll
a few weeks.
He's a full-time architect and with his own practice, working and living in New York City with his wife, Paula, and his son, Ethan, and Buddy, the dog. Steve is a joiner. He's a member of over 20 societies, including the British Empire Study Group, but also a lot of the specialty societies. As a member of the Pacific Island Study Group for 30 years, and he's been secretary of the Fellowship of the Samoan Specialists for 20 years, and president of the Society of Australasian Specialists and Oceania, and the British Caribbean Study Group. Steve is also a part-time stamp dealer, and his wares can be found on his webpage, which is www.zirinskystamps.com. And it's the emphasis on the unusual and recent commercial mail and revenues is what it mainly provides. He's written extensively on newly discovered issues, and it's been featured several times in Lynn's and Stanley Gibbons. He publishes his research on a website as well. It's the post-World War II Picturn parcel rates and things of that nature. So if you want the exotic or the, and it's related to islands, Steve's the guy. And so today we're going to hear about the road untraveled, which is exactly the road he travels, and some locally overprinted stamps. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everybody. I thank you, British Empire Study Group, for giving me this opportunity to bend everybody's ear for an hour. So I want to wish everybody, first of all, a happy new year and a healthy one. And if it's not your new year, I still wish you a happy new year and a healthy year. So to me, I've been getting a lot of local mail from a lot of countries for 30 years, and it's been very interesting to see what leads the different countries to overprint their stamps. Now, this talk is not really going to be about the stamps themselves. It's more about the process. I mean, because I'm looking at not quite a dozen countries, and the number of stamps is 500. I can't sit there and just rattle off all these different stamps, although I can do that. I'm sorry, I can talk for a lot more than an hour, as some of my family can tell you, and maybe there's a place for that at some point where I can talk about Papua New Guinea overprints and just do that for an afternoon, or Fiji, or some such thing. But I that wasn't the intention of what I'm trying to achieve here. What I'm trying to do is trying to understand the factors that that governs the decisions and how these decisions actually unfold. Because a lot of the times, none of this stuff is written down. The government decides they need the stamps locally, and as far as they're concerned, they're not new stamps anyway, so they don't have to tell anybody. And how do you find out about it? Well, it shows up in the mail, and these are local stamps. They're not international stamps. It doesn't go anywhere. And so they try to get the printer down the road to do it. And when that machine breaks, it gets to be kind of interesting. So that's the intention of the talk. Now I'm going to try and click down to the next page here. Let's see if I do it without making a mess. Here we go. So why overprint? Well, the main reason is when the local customers come up to the counter, you have to have stamps there for them to buy. And if you do something else, like, postage paid, you can't document the money's paid for that. The sheet of stamps is sold and you can account for it. It's countable. And then what do you do with obsolete stamps? They have monetary value, and they also represent a security concern. For example, I remember just reading an article recently about the Falkland Islands. Well, I think it was maybe Bermuda. They had 40 years worth of obsolete stamps, and so the postmaster took all the stamps, put them in a wood crate, and they dumped it out in the ocean, and the crate floated away. That's not a good answer. So then they eventually jumped in the water, dragged the stamps out, and then burned them, and down the road at the fire department. But obsolete stamps, they have, even though they're obsolete, they have monetary value. The government's worried about that. And if you put them in a vault, that's fine, but how much can you keep in a vault? And so anyway, so that's and you can get the printer to do stamps, but if you have like International Philatelic or whatever, the Cuesta or whatever, well, it used to be Cuesta, would do these. But it takes time to get them, and they're not cheap, particularly if you're doing just first-class stamps. Say it's 10 cents and 20 cents. Then that's a lot of money to have, your typical contractor print them for you. So, okay, and so going back to this concept of accounting and security, the number of stamps that you give to the printer must equal the number of stamps sent. So the contractor can't get rid of the waste. It's got to go back to the post office, and they decide what to do with it. And the post office, when they get this pile of stamps, has to check for errors. And they're not sure what they're checking for because they don't know what the errors are going to be. So that may not be so easy to figure out. But the primary concern, as I think my exhibit will discuss, is that the old value is obliterated and the new value is visible. So that's an important thing to think about, I think. And then sometimes the post office will run trials to see how it looks. when they be printed, whether it's enhanced in some manner, or maybe they used a color that makes no sense. And you'll see some of that. And so the countries that we're going to cover today, the St. Vincent, Guyana, Fiji, Tonga, Trinidad and Tobago, Malawi, Cook Islands, Papua New Guinea, and Samoa. Again, I'm talking about the way they're thinking about the stamps, and I'm not looking at the full range of the stamps, say, for example, in Papua New Guinea or in Fiji. In fact, in Fiji, I'm only showing one item. So anyhow, on we go. So right now, as you see, it's turned red, and I've gone to St. Vincent, and here we go. First page. What you have to do to order stamps is you have to send a requisition. So the item on the left is a requisition from the post office to the printer showing what they wanted. This is from St. Vincent. This is in, I don't know, 2002. I don't know what to say there. I can't quite read it. And you can see that they had $2 stamp, 50th anniversary of St. Vincent Scouting. I'm looking, I'm using that, pointing with my finger. Can't do that. I used to use the mouse. And then here's 116 sheets at 40 stamps a sheet. That's 4,640 stamps. They get that back, and they check off an X next to it. They got it back. Now, if I'm the printer, this is what I'm doing. This is here. They're changing values of 10 cents. Night flowers, 500 sheets, 75 cents. Greenity, and sometimes you can't even understand what the hell they're talking about. Anyway, so but now this is stuff that readily one doesn't really see. And again, the governments here don't consider these new stamps. They're old stamps. And in the case of St. Vincent, for example, they had 35 years of wallpaper sitting in the vault. And the real reason they had to get rid of it was it was starting to rot. And so some of the sheets that they overprinted were rotted. And so you get some weird wacko things. You have a full sheet and the middle stamp's missing. Why? That one was too rotted. I don't know how that works. But anyhow, so now here, for example, is an example of a stamp where the value is upside down. And that wasn't a problem because the value is there, but then they had to blot out the value by hand, even though, and so someone went around and did that to all these sheets. Particularly the one on the right. The one on the left is, you can see where the obliterator was good, they didn't have to bother, but then when it got a little wonky toward the bottom there, they had to. And then this one is where the sheet was inverted. This 10 cent is inverted. This is a mint example of what I showed you on the previous screen. And then this is what the stamps are supposed to look like. This is just this particular series. There's 180, 190 stamps from St. Vincent that were done. This particular series has coinage on it, was intended for revenue use, but often was used for postage because postage was 20 cents, and they would have 20 of these stamps in the drawer sitting at the till, at the cash register, and in stores. And here's more examples of some of the inverts, different types. Inverted here, then a double invert here, and then an invert and a regular, and then here without the value, and then this is a double, another double, and more doubles, and there's a lot of this. Here's a double, and then so you can see what the preponderance is. There's a lot of double printings in this particular series. Then in St. Vincent, they had come up with a way to create stamps locally. They printed what was called skeleton stamps. As you can see here, these designs are just blank stamps. St. Vincent, it could be some of the islands as well. And that way they could print things on them. Like here, for example, you could do sue for relief, stamp duty. And so this is a handy thing to have. And then at one point, they ran out of 10 and 20 cent stamps because they got tired of overprinting. And then they used that, and they just printed 10 cents on them. So suddenly these things are sitting in the vault now are 10 cents. And then 1 year they did, because they had 20 cent rate, they printed a bunch of 10 centers. Then the following year, the rate went up to 30 cents, or later in that same year, went up to 30 cents, and then they printed a bunch at 30 cents. And this particular one, the marine stamp, this pale stamp here, only used, I think, on the electric bills, because their permit machine broke down, and then they had a special printing just done for the electric bill for 1 month. That's it. And then they got their permit, or they got a permit number, or they got a permit machine, and so much for that. So you really kind of have to, the deeper you go into the weeds, the more interesting it gets, as most things are. So here's an example of it just used, and not the one from the electric division, somebody else. This is the water folks. Typical, just standard use. Okay, so now what was I going to say? What happened to? All right, now I guess I'm moving on to Guyana. And Guyana had, let's see. Well, we'll start with the first slide. Guyana printed their stamps here, and if you see, it's printed, but it didn't always quite work out. As you can see, the obliterator is high. On this side, it's fine. So when they got down to the side of the sheet, somebody had to sit there by hand and cross these things in. And I guess that's okay. So you can see here, it's clean from the bottom bottom right hand corner. Going this way as it gets worse. Although one's a little hard to say why it's the box. Oh, that's the box is going up that way. Yeah. Anyway, and then this was fine, so to speak, until that machine broke down. And this was down the road at the printery. And when that machine broke down, they resorted to a rubber stamp and magic marker, crossing off the old value and then the rubber stamp with the new value. And the postmaster told me they got really annoyed at Treasury, because Treasury would send them down all these sheets, and they say, we need them back by next Thursday. And the post office is like, what do you think we are, chopped liver? We're putting the mails out. So they had to take 7 or 8 people, the clerks, sit them down and have them overprint these things by hand for hours. Now, just so you know, $20 in Guyana, even the day this was done, it was about 6 cents. So you're printing a whole sheet like this. I don't know, you know, if it's $1, I'd be surprised. But the one thing is, when you do it by hand, it's a whole different process than when you do by machine, because there's no setup charges. So you can give them all kinds of different size sheets. You can give them anything you want, and it comes back, you know. And so as a result, you know, maybe they did 1 sheet like this, or maybe it's 100 sheets. Sometimes you can't tell. Here are 2 other examples. This is a strip that's done that way, and they changed the old value and they sat there and put 20 cents on it. Here, this is a well-known definitive stamp that's been overprinted hundreds of thousands of times, and why should they avoid using this? So they did. And then you can see here on the upper right-hand corner, you can see the sheet number. You know, some of these things have lots of sheets, you know, 106,000 sheets. That's a big stack. It's a small room. And it moved on its own. And then here's another example of hand value, and I'm using the this format, this presentation, because you can really see the stamps large. It's kind of fun. If I do it on a screen at the end of a room, no one can really see. So, and then of course you can get all kinds of weird things. Then you get these Disney stamps, which is really wallpaper. Well, except for those Disney collectors out there. But and then it turned into something very different now. And these used on covers are fun. And I didn't put them in, but here's an example of where the magic market goes wild. And I think they had 2 values printed. I think they had revenue and the value there. So, and then now I'm going to talk about Fiji. Now, Fiji's situation was different. They didn't need local stamps as such. The postmaster looked in their vault. They just ordered more stamps, and then the internet got very busy, and everybody's use of the stamps went way down. And so they're sitting there looking at $7 million in Fijian currency and stamps in the vault, and they're like, what do we do with these stamps? So they decided to overprint them for use. And so ever since 2006, they've been overprinting them different values. And in fact, as part of this process, they told people not to, they could no longer use their meters. They had to come and buy stamps. They were so concerned about the number, about the postage sitting there. And so I'm only showing one example, but here's just a simple example showing the 40-cent stamp when you have a 2 cent, 2 cent, and a 1 cent. And what's kind of annoying about this, you have to really read the stamp to know what the value is, because these are the 2 of the same stamps. And there's no way of, there's no hierarchy differential, which can be very hard when you're trying to figure out how to do postage. And so now we get to Tonga, and the Tonga post office decided they needed local rates, and so they printed them up locally. And then in 2008, they ran out of local stamps. And what they did was they used postage paid for a month. And then they realized this is no good because you didn't know how much money you're collecting. And then they did hand stamps. Then a month or two later, they issued stamps. So to me, some of the more interesting envelopes here would be the ones with nothing on them. But we'll get there in a minute. And when I was talking about before about being able to read the value, I got this envelope. Ooh, stop. Down boy. Okay. I got this envelope in the mail, and I didn't think much of it. But you look at it, what's wrong with this envelope? And I couldn't understand why they were using these 55-cent stamps to pay postage going down the road when the postage was 10 cent or 20 cent. And I realized, holy moly, they crossed out the value. They just obliterated with a slash. Look at that. I mean, there's nothing written about this. This is in 2003, and it shows up. I'm like, I wrote the book. Why not? Because there's no book to read first. Got to start somewhere, right? So, but this just makes it kind of like the stuff shows up. It doesn't announce itself. How do you know it's good? How do you know it's anything? And so here's an example of a later version of that where they try to make the value a little bit more understandable. And they had a little trouble with the registration here on this one. And it happens a lot. You'll see a lot of doubles. Here's a blow up. This is a great thing about PowerPoint. There you go. Nice and big. So you can really see, what's going on. And here's more examples of it. These are all, there's a light overprint, shifted overprint, double overprint. There must be some with inverted somewhere or another. These are all shifted. You can see. There's a diagonal here someplace, I think. And then here's the original issue. And there's a 15-cent version of it. And then I'm not showing these right now. But here's an example. All of these used on an envelope. Now it's interesting. You look at this, and so you obviously realize that they had need for these stamps. But they must not have had high values of the post office. I think this is I think it's high. I can't see right now, but maybe it's I don't think it's Nukalufa. And so they didn't have any high value stamps. And if you think about it, this is putting a lot of 5-cent stamps on here, 5 cent, 20 cent, to get it to go, it's inter-island. So, well, of course, you have to add in the backs. Stay. How do I get this to do what I want to do? Yeah, sorry. This is the back side. Yeah, this is from Vavau. Okay. And then you can see all these stamps here. It's the same envelope. If it's got $3 in postage on it, I'd be surprised. But they clearly ran out of stamps. Having stamps at the post office makes a difference. They didn't have any high values because they had to use these. Because who would use these values otherwise? I mean, not in a big package like this. It doesn't make any sense. It took them a while. It took them longer to put the stamps on, and it's taken me to talk about it. And I've been talking about this for a couple of minutes already. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then here, now this is an example of just using. This is the same series. But how do you make sure people can read it? The first three on the upper left, 1, 2, 3, you can hardly read the values. And they got a little smart. I put it down there. Oh, they started making it bigger. Okay. And they made it a little fatter. And then, oh, did I miss one? Oh, then here they finally made it really fat. So that makes sense. Now you can read it, but then they stopped. Anyway, so here's a version of double impressions, commercially used. And here is 10 July 2008, when they had no stamps. To me, this is very interesting because this shows only trying to piece together the story, what's actually going on. And then what happens is they decided, okay, we're going to hand stamp. This is shades of Guyana. When you look at this, this is a 30-cent stamp, 30 cent, and then that's a hand stamp with the X's. And then here it is larger. You get a sense of how much irritation it must be to do it. Now, these stamps are not available mint, because I think you mailed them a letter, they put the stamp on it. I don't, because I couldn't get them. Couldn't get them mint. I don't think anybody could. Maybe somebody has, but I think the intention was you present your letter, you give them the 30 cents, and then they mail the letter for you. Oddly enough, very few of these have postmarks. And here's another one on a butterfly. Again, a larger version of it. You can see that's a hand stamp there, and 30S. And another version of another one, 30 hand stamp 30S. I would not want to be the person sitting there trying to do this. Talk about a job that would drive me crazy. And here's an example of the 4 stamps done like that, all together. And then they said, and once they got through the, I guess their crisis, I guess they printed them by hand. And then they went back to printing them, and they did other stamps like you see here. Now the interesting thing is, what kind of quantities do they print? You know, if my feeling is if they did 2,000 stamps, it'd be a lot. You know, a stack of 20 sheets, 30 sheets, 50 sheets. And then here is examples of that second printing. The printed version, the second printing. And then this stamp here in the bottom, I've only seen 2 copies. And the one on the previous slide, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. This butterfly, I've only seen 1 copy. Clearly, it's a full sheet out there someplace, or the rest of it. Okay, and now I'm going to talk about Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Trinidad attitude was a little different. They had old obsolete stamps, boxes of these things, and they decided they wanted to print them, put values on them that they could use for local postage. And so that's what they did. They took values they didn't have much use for, and they're still doing it. This is going back, I don't know, 7 years or so, and there's that, and then here's the one with the line through it. I guess that didn't work out too well. But although this would work, because I mean, this is probably printer's waste because they have a line through it. But meanwhile, it's got a value. It could be used. And then more registration issues here. And again, the post office goes through and they try to weed out the things that are not, you wouldn't want on the counter, so they try to pull things like this out. Let me see what. And now I'm talking about Malawi. Malawi situation is different yet again. Malawi had to do with inflation. Most of these other countries didn't. Well, Guyana had inflation, but most of the other countries weren't concerned with inflation. But Malawi, for example, you have a K900 here on a K65 stamp, and then they'd have these things at an angle. Now, just because they go through and they pull them out doesn't mean they pull out all of them. Sometimes the values, they miss them, or maybe they miss they miss a variety, because they don't know what they're looking for any more than I do. So, and then you go to the next one here. This one's, I don't know how this exactly happened. They put it in the wrong way first. You can see the values here. I guess they must have put it in the wrong way. I guess they couldn't figure out which way is the right way. And then they printed it the other way. I guess if you're doing a run of, I guess you have to figure what if you do a run of 100 sheets, the first 5 are going to be messed up on maybe on both ends, and then all the good ones will be in the middle. So if you do a run of 1,000 sheets, you're only going to have the 5 at the beginning and the 5 at the end that are bad. So you have a lot less waste percentage. Anyhow, and then of course, if you put the sheet in upside down, all bets are off. And then sometimes you just have really bad days. And if you're a postmaster of Tanzania, you pull this. So now I'm going to talk about the Cook Islands. Now the Cook Islands, this is a different yet again. The Cook Islands have been overprinting stamps for, I don't know, forever. And they overprinted them 10 cents, 20 cents, 30, all kinds of values. And suddenly, the next 2 things I'm going to show you showed up in the mails for a couple months. And that was it. I didn't think anything of it. I just put it in the drawer. I didn't worry about it. But they're not listed anywhere. Nobody knew about it. The philatelic agent doesn't know anything about it. And the post office itself wasn't so sure. And it was just used. It was used locally. The rate went up. They had 25-cent stamps. They didn't need 25-cent stamps. They needed 20 cents. So they printed them. I don't know how many, 2,000 stamps, last them a couple of months. Your guess is as good as mine. I wouldn't say it's much more than that. And they take the 15 cent, they didn't need that, so you put 10 cents on it. Here, this one has got a legible postmark. The Rarotonga postmarks are not really legible. So you can kind of date them as a result. You know it's from this period. But this one you can see, so it's helpful. But again, this doesn't show up. I think this only showed up in Lynn's a few months ago, and I think in the Pacific Island Study Circle, I think a year or 2 ago. But again, the stuff just happens. Sometimes they took old stamps. They needed stamps for the mails, so that's what they did. And now I'll talk about Papua New Guinea. Okay, I'm not going to. They have a. I'm going to talk about the process and what they do. In the first one, I'm showing just a couple errors. The first one shows the 21T shifted and used with a 20T. I don't know why they overrated it so much at the time. And the second one here shows an inverted kiss print or something like that. And then I'm showing off here on the lower right. This is what the stamp's supposed to be. And then when you don't have the value, this is what it looks like. And when you have a postal clerk saying, hey, where's the value? He sticks the value on it. Excuse me. And then in Papua New Guinea, they would change the stamps to meet current rates. And in fact, this series, sometimes they weren't raising the rates quickly, and so they had to get stamps, or they had a lot of extra older stamps since they overprinted them. And then at some point in the 2016 or so, these are not overprinted stamps, but this is a makeup rate because they decided that they had a lot of 1 kina 30 toyas, 1.30, 1 kina 30 stamps, and the new rates were 140, 145, 150. They said, okay, our solution is let's print a lot of 5 cent, 5 toya stamps, and we'll just add them to the other values. This saves us overprinting and this or that. And so they did that, and it's actually a good solution to a way to use up the old stock. And oops, went the wrong way, my bad. And then they did several versions here, and they had 5 toya, then they have 20 toya, and they first did the 20 toya here, 5 toya here. There's the larger versions. This I had these they did in the machines in Port Moresby, which it's been cranky. Sometimes it breaks down, sometimes it doesn't. And then these were done in sheets, I think, of 40, and they did these for a couple months until those sheets ran out, and then they went back to a format that this might be sheets of 20, and that they went back to these, or they had plenty of this, and they're still using this format. So these on the right with I call them the long types. South Australia, folks don't get upset. We were only used for a short period of time, and then they ran out. And they went to this here, and so that's in it. I think it's an interesting thing. And then here's an example of a small one used, and then a larger one used, a couple large ones, and another large one. We're just running through a couple of these different things, keeping an eye on the clock. And then at some point, they decided, I think this may have been a year, maybe a little out of sequence, a year or two before that, they take the 1 Kina 20 value here and they put 130 on it. And they did that for a little while. But then they realized that it's easier to use the stamps, what I just showed. Oops, wrong way. Here's another example of 120 raised to 130. But again, why go to all this trouble to overprint something to add 10 cents to it? It's like a lot of work. But then they said, okay, well, if we're going to do that, we're going to do high value we can change the value because we don't have any 40 Kina stamps. So we'll do this. We'll put it on, and we'll put it on, and so we can pay for package and so forth. And so they've done that, and they had high values up to 90 Kina, and now they have stamps they're printing in-house. They go up to, I think, also 90 Kina, maybe a little higher. And then more recently, they've done, again, why would you do this? You can't read it. They put use one ink to obliterate, if you want to call it that, the value. And then the new value over here, but I can't read that, even when it's large. Oops. Well, now you can almost read it. Who reads like that? We're all getting old. You can't read a goddamn thing. Anyway, here we go. Another value, 1 Kina 60. And now there are a couple of different varieties of this. There's a registration mark here in the corner that sometimes this is doubled, sometimes they're inverted. But this was issued last year. Like if you go back and you see, it's September 2020. Now, there's an awful lot I can go on about Papua New Guinea in this regard, and I know the people from who are listening, who are hoping I talk more about it. Doesn't mean I'm not interested in talking about it. Doesn't mean I wouldn't want to do another presentation on it. If you want me to do a presentation on it, please let the British Empire Study Group know, and I'm sure they can bend my arm without too many bottles of whiskey to do so. I guess that's a hint. Anyway, so now we go on to Samoa. Now Samoa has got they've been overprinting stamps for a while, all locally, and they're again, they had a lot of stuff in the vaults, and they needed high values because people are mailing packages, and they needed the local rates. So now, when you're trying to overprint stamps, you kind of want to, this goes back to the conversation about, how do you make it read? Well, you can't read this. You wouldn't, I mean, if I didn't tell you that it said 50 cents, how would you know? Well, it happens to be a double overprint, but never mind that. You really need something like this. That's better. Okay, now you can read. Now you can read it. Now you can do something about it. I mean, I have these in sheets. I could show you the whole sheet, but I thought it's more important to see the stamps and see it like this. Now, so these are local rate, the local stamps for local rates, and then sometimes, and Samoa would do this, they would have a couple of sheets blank, and the printer would print them up on blank sheets. It's like the form. It's kind of interesting. And to me, what's interesting also here is you see the dots, how the variable, I guess it's gray, or it seemed to be the same size as the perforation holes, so maybe the perforations pop off and it gets the ink, and I don't know. And so you can see the whole constructed sheet here. This seam here is really my gluing the two halves of the thing together. It's actually a full sheet. And so then my next question is, what happened here? See, we have $20 here, $20, $20, $20, $20. Oh. So what happened? Why did that form that we just looked at have that and that doesn't? So my thinking is, well, this was a reprint or they fixed it. And this came out first. I go, oops, problem. And then of course, in case anybody, in case you have a hard time seeing as you get older, this doesn't help. And again, they've overprinted a lot of stamps. Most recently to the $200 value, which I'm not showing, but because I was told, the post office told me that they need them for packages because everybody's mailing overseas. I don't know how fast anything's getting anyplace because it takes months for anything to go. I sent something to Tonga, I don't know, 2.5 months ago. It got there yesterday. So anyway, so that concludes, I think, my presentation. My 6:40. I guess that's okay. And so I'm delighted and anxious to hear questions from anybody who cares to ask me a question.
Steve, that was wonderful. Oh, hold on. Robert, if you could ask the questions.
Okay. Well, we have a number of questions up here, Steve. Let me start from the top. This was a question about something you didn't speak about. It says, were the 3 overprinted surcharge 2005 and 7 registration issues of Namibia done locally or in Europe? That's like the kind of question you get on Johnny Carson. You hold the envelope to your forehead.
I don't know. I think they're in pretty good nick. My thinking is that they were done elsewhere. I am not 100% certain. I can find out though.
Okay. Well, it's
you can tell the fellow from Texas. I'll look it up.
okay. We have a question. Non-postal, often political or some sort of advertising overprints from Germany and Denmark, were they valid for postage as well?
What period?
Doesn't say.
Well, my guess is if it was done just prior to the war, during the war, it'd be political. UPU would probably wouldn't allow it internationally. At a guess, I don't know.
Now, here we have a very general question. This is, how do you find out about the different overprints and varieties? I mean, how do you actually, do what you do, collect these exotic overprints from faraway places with strange sounding names?
Well, that's a very good question, but if I answer that, I'll have to kill you. But I've made it my business to get local mail in a lot of these countries. And I don't know what's coming in the door. I have no clue. And then when it comes in, and then I can start piecing things together. And, I could be getting the same envelope from St. Vincent for 3 years running, and suddenly they change the stamp. Or suddenly I think it's really boring, and I realize I'm the only one who's got it, even though I have 300 of them.
Let me ask the question a little differently, Steve. Did you actually go to these places to make the arrangement to get local mail, or you do this by the phone call or an email?
That I'm not telling.
Ah, okay. But you've been to a lot of these places.
I've been to some, yes.
Yes, okay.
But being there is not the key.
Okay. And there's another question that deals with, and I think we can all answer this, are these varieties in any commonly used catalog? And the answer is probably not really.
It depends. Some of them, I don't know if Marty Frankowitz is on this or not, but some I send to Marty and to Stanley Gibbons, and they sometimes list them. If I send it to them, they list them. I don't always burden them with all of it. I mean, some of the stuff you might look at and go, well, I would, for me, the proof of the pudding is seeing it used commercially. Now, when you mean varieties, you mean error varieties, or to whoever was asking. But I mean, the question is, all right, is it an error? Like the one that one cover that I could send into, that to me is legitimate. But if I put all that in the catalog, I kind of I want to take Erling Van Dam's attitude in a way, because he's a Canadian dealer, does a lot of Canadian revenues, and he put out a very excellent catalog on Canadian revenues, and it's become the Bible for everybody. But it's concise, and it doesn't go all over the place. Because like anything, the more you get into the weeds, the larger things grow. And I feel that in my I have catalogs which you can go online and see all this stuff, and then I do break down and I do talk about the different overprints and then this and that I've observed over time. And I find that I want to kind of get the overall picture to people, because if you show someone 1,000 different varieties, I think they just scream and run the other way. And it's like, I want to kind of start with the big picture, with the more commonly available items of this thing. So that's my attitude. But I mean, I do think having it is good, but I don't necessarily present it to all the catalogs.
Okay. Should I use the name of the people asking the question? Would that help you?
It might. I don't know. It depends. Maybe they want. I guess they don't care if their name is said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. William Cromarty says he collects Costa Rica, and he says that he wants to know if any of these countries have considered demonetizing their stocks. It's been done in many countries where they demonetize the stamps. And occasionally, in this example he gives for Costa Rica, they overprinted habilitado, which I guess means it's been rehabilitated, and you can use these stamps again. And I would like to add, there was a small Indian feudal state called Travancore, which had its own printing, and they had the similar thing with lots of upside down S's when they do their just hundreds and hundreds of what we would call just errors from the mainstream, if you will. And Stanley Gibbons lists most of these. They don't list all of them, but they certainly do list most of them. John Krupnik wants to know what has happened with my favorite island, Tokelau, since my friend Patrick O'Connor retired and returned to Greytown.
John, I can't tell you what happened the last year. I've lost track of them, but I'll get hold of them again. They have postmarks, but only one of the islands responded to me. I think it was Falacao.
And Jim Gerson wants to know, I've noticed many of the envelopes are from the Internal Revenue Service. What's your source? And I guess that's also a trade secret.
Yeah, well, it should be evident.
Yes. Daryl Templer asked, to what extent is such overprinting aimed at the philatelic market?
This in this case, it's not,
No.
because it's all local rates. I mean, you talking about the errors? Or you talking about the normal stamps?
I think he's talking about the errors,
I think it's just
or the overprints.
well, for example, in Tonga, I was able to get a couple of sheets of some of the overprints, but then we're a year or two later, everybody else found out about it, and then they said, "Oh no, we can't sell to collectors anymore. It's really meant for the post office counters."
Well,
So again, if they're doing it local,
yeah,
that and it shows up in the mails, and it's not showing up in some. I mean, because in theory, they print 4,000 stamps at 10 cents. I could write a check for $400 and buy out the issue, right? It wouldn't take much, but that's not the point of running a government. It's not what I want to do. I'm not looking to have them find 15 different ways of saying no. So
Norma Nielsen has an interesting question. On the last image, she notes that there's a price on the sheet, like what the total value of the sheet was, but she says, do they ever overprint the sheet price? Have you seen that?
It has happened, but it's not common. It's not common at all. Because they usually don't worry about that. Again, it's just going to the counter, and there have been times, I think in Trinidad, there's been inscriptions on the margins, for some of the overprints, but I don't think it didn't relate to the stamp, the value.
Yeah. Are you aware of anyone actually trying to, this question comes from Nick Halewood. Has anyone actually tried to position the Samoan stamps based on the dots on the overprint form that you showed us?
I could probably show you another form. The dots would be in different spots. I think the because on the stamps themselves, you didn't see the dots. So the dots are variable sheet to sheet.
Okay. The gentleman, Jack Gringlass, he wants to know if your interests extend to stamps that were overprinted earlier, like in the early 1900s, or is it just the modern material?
Well, I find it's a good question. To me, I find the recent stamps more interesting because it's more challenging because there's nothing written on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather be the first guy to walk down a road. Yeah, and then have other people correct me. Oh, you did it wrong this way, but meanwhile, no, who knew about it? You know, so to me, the joy is the discovery of it. And
Yes, I can really appreciate what you're showing is like, 50 years from now, people say, oh, where do we find something like this?
yeah.
There's a question, I don't quite understand the question, but it might maybe makes more sense to you. It's Frederick Lawrence. He says, you started with St. Vincent $2 Baden-Powell stamp, overprinted and revalued. And then he says, can you show an image?
I had it there. You want me to? There was an image of a Baden-Powell
I
stamp.
think maybe if he could private message you, if he wants to see an image, you could share it with him.
Well, Fred, just give me your email again, and I'll send you the image.
Okay, all right. Rafael Perez says, how could you recognize real overprint errors from manipulated ones? Assuming that they're actually manipulated errors.
Well, I think the good question is on that subject is how do you know why didn't I take out my ballpoint pen and just change the value in some of these stamps? I have a flare, I have a ballpoint pen, I can do it. But then I think the real proof of the pudding is in it's going to be backwards, but there, just seeing the stamps used on envelope shows it's now with the double kiss prints and stuff like that. I think the machines just do things, and I don't think anything I got over the years has been fabricated, especially because I wouldn't buy it if I saw it, if I could identify it as such.
And then we have a technical question from Clarence Stillians. How were these surcharges printed? Were they printed from set type in a printing press, or are they printed on a computer printer?
I think it's set type, by and large.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, if you look at the first series of Guyana is a good example where you have the print form. That was done, a big sheet. I don't think in a big sheet like that you can't put that in a photocopier.
Kolbjorn, I'm really going to mess this name up. It's Schloberg.
Oh, he's calling. He's asking me about Trinidad.
Yes, he says a comment to the dots. To my understanding, and what has been explained to me, these are remnants from the original perf. That is, the sheets arrive from the printer and they go directly to the vault. Then years later, it's sent for an overprint, and the loose perfs clutter the overprint process, thereby appearing in variable positions.
Right, that makes sense to me.
Seems very logical. Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I thought it looked like perf holes, like donut holes.
So that's the open questions that people have typed in, but I think we're all over in the room now, Joan.
Yeah, I think we have everybody over. If you're not over, please raise your hand, which is that little raised hand on the bottom, and we'll bring you over.
Okay, then people can chat amongst themselves and ask Steve even more questions.
But it was a fascinating talk, Steve. And I think you're modest. You actually got things listed in Gibbons and Scott.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, Hugh puts up with me over there in Stanley Gibbons, and I send him stuff, so he puts it in, and yeah, I don't know. Somebody else can do the tally, but I'm guessing at 500 stamps between
Wow.
between Gibbons and well, 500 stamps, and then Gibbons lists them, and then Scott lists them. So yeah, and then I send the stamps off. They can check them out.
Wow. Very impressive. Whole talk was very impressive. Thank you very much.
Sure, happy to do it. So I think it's interesting. To me, it's like, why do the governments do what they do anyway? It's like, well, I mean, on a political level, yeah, but why? You got to move the mails. How do you get it? How do you make that happen? And each country is different. If you're in the middle of the Pacific and your Tonga or your Samoa, you got to rely on local things sometimes if the big boat doesn't show up.
Oh, you
Or
did
you don't want to
mention,
pay, or you don't want to pay for the big boat to show up.
well, you did mention how long it takes to get a parcel to Papua New Guinea, I think it was. That it takes 2 months to get it done might be part of why they have to go do these local things.
Right now, yes, yeah. Right now, mails. Well, right this moment in time, mail is very difficult because the COVID mail restrictions and lack of transport.
I'm thinking on reprints, and I haven't seen an American reprint, American overprint for a long time. Is it because technically we have an advantage in our printing of stamps that we don't have to do these things?
No, we burn them. A lot of issues I think get used. I'm guessing 50%, 60%. Then you have the rest sitting in a vault, and at some point you decide to destroy them. St. Vincent didn't want to take that approach. They wanted to use up their old wallpaper. So to me, they turned wallpaper into gold. Other countries try and do different things. And at some point, I think in Guyana, they did that for a while, and they got fed up with the whole thing. And they finally got the printer to print the right value stamps they needed. Sometimes they don't do that. Oh, hi, Simon. Did I answer the question? I got distracted, sorry.
Yeah. I do notice that people like Jim Fort and some of the people who go through, they tend to deliberately use older U.S. stamps of lower value to add up to the current value. Because
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, you can do that. That's fine. It's probably because they pay 60 cents on the dollar. I do that too. It's postage. It's fine. Get old postage. But go back to that the story about Bermuda where they're trying to destroy the old stamps. A lot of countries, you can't. They print for the collectors, or they print, for the collecting universe. And if for example, in Fiji, what happened was the postage rate changed, and they didn't need 53-cent stamps or whatever it was anymore. They didn't have a value. They didn't have a reason for that, and so they decide, okay, what are we can do with these 100,000 stamps we have sitting here, so we're going to print some of them with 1-cent stamps, and then we're going to change the location of where the 1 cent is going, and then we're going to put 3 X's as opposed to 2 X's. Then we'll do it halfway during the sheet. It goes on and on and on, but and all that gets to be kind of interesting. But again, I was just trying to stay away from that. I don't. There are too many rabbit holes to go down. I only want to go down one this time.
do you have have you managed to get a good tan with some of your secret methods?
Well, that's only because I don't wash. So, but yeah, no, it's fun. I think it's led into other exploits that like perforations, and not perforations at post offices, and some post offices, they go. Part of the postal operation is, okay, you have to cancel the mail. Well, the postal clerks like to use a rubber cancel. It's much easier in the hands than the old steel die ones. But the rubber ones were out in 2 years. But that's not a problem. But if you're in St. Lucia, not that this has anything to do with overprints, but say you're in St. Lucia, the clerks at each of the regional, you have the main post office, the cashiers, and everybody else is a sub post office. And so what they do is all the mail that comes in, when the post office van drops off all the mail, and they're busy sitting there back stamping everything. I say, why are you back stamping? So your local customers can't blame you. You got it, and they're busy back stamping, and so that one canceled. It's not just the mail going out, but all the electric bills and everything else that's coming in. They're busy back stamping, and they got thousands. So anyway, so you think they got no mail, but they get mail anyway. So not the same thing, maybe not just used on the mail going out, but they're back used for the inbound mail. They don't want to get blamed. This happened in Vivau when the post office told me there, oh yeah, we backstamp all our mail. So when the mail comes in from Nukalufu, we don't get blamed for it because they screwed up with it down there. I said, but how come you haven't changed your date stamp in the back in the last 3 years? Oh, and suddenly they fixed the back stamp. So you kind of like wonder really what the idea is good, but then sometimes the practice, and maybe the back stamp worked until someone decided they didn't have to worry about it anymore. So suddenly, all of a sudden, everything was back stamped again properly. So anyhow, I'm not sure if I answered the question or not, but I kind of went off in a tangent. Easy to do.
Steve, Ed Grabowski here. I've got a question for you. When you get a new listing in a catalog, how do you establish catalog values?
It depends. If it's priced, I don't always. Sometimes I'll leave it blank. If I think it's a common enough stamp, I'll try to put a dollar value on it. If I think it's hard to come by, then I won't. Because there are times I'll put a high value on it. But yeah, I'm not, I'd rather put a low value on a stamp. That way get people enticement, into the value. It's a good question. And if I'm the only one that has it, then I'm not always the only one who has it. So it really depends.
Boy, silence, was he that good? I'm just amazed. So when you look at, I always think of philately as the older issues. I was just so amazed that what you do, what must have been what the collectors were experiencing when stamps first came out, when there was really no catalogs, no books. And these, from a collector's point of view, they were just appearing on letters. That's sort of really cool.
Yeah, no, and it's alive and well, I think, in certain aspects. I think there's a Trinidad group that's, all over the overprints that the post office there comes out with, and the Papua New Guinea collectors are like, I'm part of this nut house of the Papua New Guinea collectors, so we're all what's happening with this overprint, and not so much overprints. Well, the printing machine doesn't work anymore. Oh, they fixed it finally, because Papua New Guinea was trying to handle a lot of this stuff locally. Certain issues, those 5 Toya stamps they try to do, which is kind of interesting. So I think this format's kind of nice. I mean, being able to see people from Australia. There's one over there. You see, there's an Ian from Australia, and I think Nick Hale with him. I think you're from you're in Japan, I think.
Good morning to you.
Japan. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Ian. And I'm sure there's Simon, and Richard Moss, and Frank. I know good. I know some of these folks.
I got a question for you.
Mhm.
So what does actually, how the catalog people determines which stamps goes into the catalog and which stamps don't go into the catalog listings?
Got to ask them. I just give it to them. They decide whether it's worth it or not. For example, those 5 Toya stamps I showed you before, Scott doesn't list them because they don't want to really view. They don't view personalized stamps as something because the post office can just print them up. They could do 1 sheet or something, or 2 sheets, or this or that, and they view that as something as not catalogable. Of course, I disagree. And now we're at 1,000. I have a catalog out that's got more than 1,000 different varieties. So, but maybe actually they're right. But but Gibbons will list some of that. So and I don't tell them what they should list. I only tell them what's new, and I let them decide. I can't. But usually, if I show it to them on an envelope, they'll list it. And in fact, Scott Catalog eventually got around to calling me. Marty got around to getting hold of me about the Cook Island 10-cent and 20-cent stamp. He goes, "Are you familiar with this?" I said, "Yeah, I have some knowledge of it." He goes, "Have you seen any of these used on cover?" And I sent him those 2 images I sent you. He goes, "Right, I'm going to list it now." He said, because to me, it looked like he couldn't, he only had it on pieces and didn't mean anything. Now he knew it was commercially used. It was fine. So, sometimes it's not me deciding any one thing. It's me presenting it, and you'll learn a little bit from somebody else, and eventually you get a rounder picture. And that's what is interesting, because it's so much ground to learn on each of these things. It's so I'm not looking at a book about the 1879 overprints in South Australia, or which has already been looked at 3 times. I don't know. I just go down an uncharted road, and that's why it's untraveled. And I'm sorry, Ian, I did not show you any overprinted stationery. My humble.
No, does much exist?
Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, this is Karen Fraser. I have a question for you. If you come across some of these, is there a centralized place that you can look them up? Like as your site or any other sites you might recommend?
How do you mean? I'm sorry. Look up.
Just to see a reference for them. I mean, obviously there's the catalogs, but these are new and evolving things. If you find an overprint like in a mixture and it's not in the catalogs, are there other sources that you could go to validate that other people have found these?
Possibly. What I do with my stuff is I eventually put it on my website.
Okay, so your site is, you have a location for all that kind of stuff.
Actually, it's interesting. Yeah, I have a place where you can go buy things, of course. And then I have another section which is called Studies and Articles. And oftentimes I talk about postal rates of the last 20 years in some countries. And it's a tool that people can use for whatever they want. And then as I get more information, I put more of that on. I have some of the printing quantities for the St. Vincent stamps, because I had, as you can see, I had some of that information there. And I put it up, and then sometimes people look it up and they let me know about other things. If I found a stamp in a mixture, it would depend, but I tend not to find stamps in mixtures. I tend to get full envelopes. So.
I understand, and then you have that, you have that whole source that you've developed. But for the average collector, like myself, who loves going through mixtures,
Oh yeah,
and particularly recent mixtures with all this crazy stuff, if I were to find something I couldn't look up, I'll check your site for sure.
and I'd be curious if it's. I'd be curious to help them find out if I can't figure it out. Yeah, I don't mind.
Yeah.
But that's also an interesting thing. Thank you for bringing that up. I should put, and I think if we figured out things electronically, when this presentation goes online, I'll have links to the parts of my. I don't want to do it here because it was just, I don't want to start talking about 1,000 different stamps, because it would just dilute the impetus of what I was trying to get at. But I can't have links on my website to all of these different things. Yeah, on the end of this presentation, I think we'd be able to, that when you click on the presentation online, you'll be able to see the link, and you can just click on the link to take you right to that study, right to that article.
Are there any books coming up on this or in the works?
Do you have any? I have.
By you or by other people looking to start writing books on this?
I have done, and a lot of it's on the website. Some of but what happened?
That's it. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Anyway, I have. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I can. Right now, I got a funny looking screen. But I'm gonna show you. I got this on St. Vincent, oh, it's backwards, St. Vincent revenues.
Mhm.
Over, another one here. But a lot of this, now that we go electronic, it's all available online. I don't have to bother mailing it to them.
You seem like one of those people that 40 years from now is going to be talked about as having kind of started the cataloging of a new field, of a new kind of philately.
I don't think it's new. I think it's a continuation of
Hmm.
the old, as Joan mentioned. I just think it's I don't think it's new. I think it's just being aware of what's happening. I think the situation in Tonga with that 1 month that they ran out of stamps. They didn't even have handprint. I just think it's just fascinating. It's like, how come they screwed up like that? But
Steve,
maybe-
it's not dissimilar to the breakup of Germany at the end of World War II, where different local areas had just applied their own overprints to deface Hitler's portrait and things like
Right.
that.
Mhm.
They were done randomly. There was no planning to it. Each town did their own thing, and I don't know whether there's any definitive listing of those or not. There probably is, but there's no central authority that's recorded them all, so that you always have that possibility that something else might be found, and always that possibility as to whether it's genuine or not, of course.
Right. Well, with this stuff, it's all common in that it's all, I'm not buying an auction house. I'm just getting used envelopes from countries. And so you don't know what you're going to see. You have to kiss a lot of frogs.
It's very much a dividing line now between the collectors that find this fascinating research material, which obviously it is, versus the collector who's got his standing order, his or hers standing order with their local dealer for new issues or with their local post office for new issues. They can't understand this material and they can't obtain it. And for many of those folk, they are actually being put off collecting the stamps of the country because they no longer can get completeness. But and also the catalogues, as you say, are facing the nightmare as to individually choosing which one they put in and which one they don't, and having some sort of basis for that. And people like Minkus and Scott and Gibbons and so on that do illustrated albums, I mean, this is anathema to them. They can't put these things in because no one knows what they are, and the average collector simply can't obtain them because the numbers printed are so tiny.
Yeah, for example, that one stamp, that butterfly stamp I showed from Tonga that was hand overprinted, I have one. What's the value of that?
Yeah. And the thematic appeal, of course, is wonderful too. I mean, there are probably more butterfly collectors than there are Tongan collectors. I don't know, but
I suspect you're right. So what do I do with a piece like that? I hold on to it. That's all. And it's not even canceled.
Yeah.
But what do you do? For some reason, my screen just says this concludes this presentation. I don't know why.
Oh, it shouldn't. We're still on. I'm not sure.
I know, but what happened? Is it just my screen that happened to?
I think it's just,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's
Screen is
just,
predicting the future.
Or the past?
Yes. This reminds me a little bit of, I was going through my parents' accumulation and all the stuff that they just gather up in the mail. And I got to the very end where I got to these stamps.com things. And now I think that's early stages where stamps.com is, you're going to start seeing some patterns of things that, where people get to customize their own stamps, and some customizations take off and some don't. And that's not something, and that's just something to watch for. But it's not, Gibbons isn't going to tell me anything about it because it hasn't happened yet.
Well, Zazzle stamps, there are all of these, private entities that people collect, Zazzle or whatever, and that's it's, I think it's again, it's not high price, it's not much known about it, and so it's fun to do. It's like, collecting penny reds.
Yeah. Steve. Hello, Steve.
What's that?
Hello, Steve. It's Richard Moss.
Oh, hi, I can't, I don't have a screen, so I can't see anybody except my.
Hi, Steve. It's Richard Moss. Can
Hi, how are
hear
you?
me? Steve, I have interest in some of these overprints, but what does concern me a little bit is that when these countries go on for years and years and years with overprints, and particularly when they accept stuff which is below standard, don't you think it reflects on it could reflect back on the standards of the post office, that they're prepared to accept this long term? I can understand it short term, but long term, I don't think it does them any good.
You thinking about Trinidad when you think
I'm
that?
thinking of a lot of them actually who go on for years and still continue to make mistakes.
Well, it's a question if they can vet this stuff out. You know, I think, you know, St. Vincent didn't care too much, as long as they had the old value crossed out. I think it's subjective. I think, you know, it's not really for me to say. Each country does, you know, did things for different reasons. I think the Cook Island thing with those 2 stamps just out of nowhere, like all these overprints they've been doing, all this stuff, wallpaper to me. These 2 things pop up out of nowhere, just kind of, it just kind of percolated its way to the surface. And so trying to find the gold from the dross is a little hard. You know, and I think, you know, there's an art to it. And each country's different. And I'm not going to say I'm going to compare Papua New Guinea to what Fiji's doing, although some of the countries do look at each other. Botswana, I think, was looking at Malawi, or no, or what Tanzania was doing. And they're taking notes, you know, because they had, so, you know, the big inflation. What do you do with these old stamps? Why burn them? You know, it seems. So, and then other countries will burn them.
Steve, many years ago, Pitcairn Island actually issued a stamp portraying the burning of their stamps.
Right.
There's a 70-cent design, I think, late 1970s, and it was quite. It was subtle propaganda in a way, because it was actually showing that they're a post office with integrity, and that they are looking after the collectors by getting rid of the unsolds and so on. And I'm not sure whether any other countries issued a stamp on that subject, but it's interesting. I think it gave some people confidence.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But, you know, every country looks at that stuff and they go, you know, they think of it as it's money, and it's a security issue. And what do we do with this stuff? You know, St. Vincent had it probably still has a tremendous amount of wallpaper. Is only you could print everything to 10 cents. It'll take you forever. You know, big rooms full of stuff. But again, who needs it? It's like, you know, but why burn it if you can use it?
In 1983 in Australia, I was involved in a Senate inquiry into the amount of unused stamps that were being destroyed by the post office. Because what happened was that the bean counters have actually counted the face value rather than the cost of printing. And they've said, all right, Australia Post last year burnt, you know, $100 million worth of stamps. What a terrible thing. Well, in reality, they've possibly burnt, I don't know, $100,000 of printing. I'm not sure, but they had an actual Senate inquiry into reducing government waste, particularly focused on the Post Office Philatelic Bureau. And I was called as a professional witness to come along to this, and it was a very, very interesting process.
Yes,
I love that story.
That's interesting. In St. Vincent, for example, the overprinting stamps is in these countries is fraught with intrigue, because, for example, I think some ministers were let go because there's $1 million worth of 10-cent stamps that had gone missing, or so claimed. You know, so, you know, I try to stay out of that. I don't need to get involved in any local intrigues.
Talking about the inquiry, that's one of the subjects about philately that I like to hear more about. There was an earlier lecture about using private boats to pick up some slack in mail on the channels. The stories of how the people in the post, the personnel in the post office, worked their, you know, work their way through temporary, sometimes just temporary challenges. And like the inquiries, it's because it's like, it's not what was done, but how it was done and who was involved and who's particularly irascible or interesting in the history that made something happen that we just figure just happened.
The interesting thing with the inquiry was that, of course, it got huge media attention because, and both the people at the inquiry and the media were utterly ignorant of the philatelic market. They couldn't understand it. They just thought, rare stamps, a lot of money, strange people, that sort of thing. And we got amazing headlines at the time from people coming up and saying, things like, what do you think the philatelic market's worth in a year? Well, it doesn't matter who you are. That's a pretty big guess on anyone's behalf. And of course, they don't understand. All they're wanting is they're wanting a large figure that they can publish in a headline. So you can say, that it's hundreds of millions or hundreds of billions or whatever figure that they arbitrarily throw around, because that's what they like to base their headline on. But the net result of the inquiry was that Australia Post reduced its printing quantities on stamps, and they no longer had them on sale for more than 6 or 12 months. They reduced the numbers of items on sale and how long they were on sale. And I think the inquiry was probably more expensive than what the savings were, but that's another story.
Often the case.
Yeah.
Hey, good night, Stephen. How are you?
Hi.
This is Derek from St. Lucia. Major Derek Mitchell from the Salvation Army. How are you?
Derek.
Wagwan.
I saw that. Oh, how are you?
I am well, my friend. Really good presentation. Thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed it. Rest assured, I will not let out any of your secrets. But you mentioned about the back stamping of stamps. And it so happened that the Salvation Army, you do a yearly appeal where we send out like over 2,000 letters of appeal to various places to ask for donations towards the funding of our programs. So I spend a lot of time at the post office in Castries.
Right.
No, I understand.
My sympathies.
I understand clearly what these guys were doing when you're talking about the back stamping. Now I know what they were doing. So I am one of them who have witnessed that in the past.
They're protecting their ass is what they're doing.
Again, I just want to say thank you for the great presentation. You did commit to join me on one of those disaster relief work. The last time we spoke, I think I was in the Bahamas doing Hurricane Dorian.
Yeah.
So you can rest assured that you're going to be getting a call from me the next time I am deployed on the disaster in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Sure, but I'm going to, since you bring that up, the St. Lucia post office got a letter when I was there from the Dominica post office, thanking them for their help during the hurricane. Because when Dominica got flattened by, what was it?
Maria.
Maria. The St. Lucia post office picked up, went over there and helped them out. And they got a letter of thanks, which I thought was very sweet. So
that was very nice. I was deployed there 6 times. We did 6 missions there.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
We'll talk more about that.
Thanks for your presentation, man. Blessings.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, man.
I can't see anything. What's happened to the screen?
I am not.
Anything?
What happened here? I'm just seeing blank. I'm going to press escape. Will that be good? Will that be bad?
You're okay to do anything you like. Did it minimize? Maybe it minimized the view.
Oh, there it is. Now I got everybody back. I must have pressed something or a bug set on the screen or something. Okay, that's better. Oh, there's Derek. Hey, okay.
Yeah. So, wow.
Could have been Joan's dog that did that.
Yeah, I know. She's.
I have my own over here. Just fell asleep on the couch. I guess what I'm saying is so interesting to him. So.
didn't see, you didn't see her licking, things, did you?
Oh, look at that. Oh, I guess he finally made it out of the bar. Tony Shields.
Yeah, she's,
I've been there for a while.
yeah, she's a funny girl.
Keep the seat warm.
She's
Oh,
right
yeah.
there.
All right,
Hey, August, say hi.
good.
She's a good girl.
Hey, John Ray. Oh, he's up late.
Hey, Steve, Frederick Lawrence.
Hey, Fred.
Steve, you opened with the handwritten order to the printers for St. Vincent. That's where that $2 Baden-Powell stamp was listed. Without disclosing any secrets and recognizing that it's probably extremely difficult to obtain that kind of documentation, am I on track here that that's really a lovely piece of ephemera or an artifact that would go into an exhibit?
Yeah,
Extremely difficult to come by, that type
Yes,
of
it's very hard.
documentation.
The answer to that is some of those, I'm going to take your question a little further. That because the requisitions show 25 stamps, it doesn't mean I could find all 25.
no.
You know, it all depends on how when they separate the stamps and they send them out someplace. Maybe they take this batch and it goes off that way, and I don't see the mail, and that's just the end of it. You know, so it's hard to tell. You know what? I have to then it's proof of the pudding. Like, can I actually find it on an envelope, or you get the stamps from the post office counter? Can't always tell. But I mean, because there are some of those overprinted stamps are in there from Lord Baden-Powell. There are some Scout stamps. I can show you some. I'll send me an email, Fred, and I'll take care of that.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, but it's hard. I sometimes to get this kind of information from the printer itself is very difficult. You know, every once in a while I can get it from the post office that they'll tell me the quantities. But the handwritten ones, hard. I think I have some handwritten ones from Malawi. But and they're full of mistakes. So
I would, Richard Moss again. I would have thought that those. I don't know whether you can hear me. It says my internet connection is unstable.
yeah, I hear you.
I would have thought that those dockets are absolutely priceless, because they actually people go to great lengths to get hold of the old Delarue books where they said how many stamps have been printed.
Right.
But to actually have the written docket for that must make a huge difference to any exhibit of that or material of that type.
I would think so. And now also because I think if it's highly sensitive, I've crossed out some information on there because I didn't want to have the printer to be actually known, or the signatory. You know, no one needs to know. It's like it's good enough.
Very nice item.
Thank you.
A question.
Priceless, sorry.
Edward Weissman has a question.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment that this has been really interesting to me. I occasionally am able to obtain foreign mail from a local organization that has international contacts. However, for privacy reasons, they refuse to let me have the entire cover. So they have volunteers, most of whom know nothing about stamp collecting, which is fine, except that I receive just the corners and sometimes even not the complete stamp. But in particular, they seem to get in clumps, as it were, lots of mail from Guyana. And so that was interesting at the beginning. In fact, even with the promo material that came out with the lapwing stamp, I've gotten any number of copies that I've soaked them off because there's no reason to keep them on paper. It doesn't prove anything really.
Oh, no, it proves date of use.
Yeah, but these are clipped so close, somebody could have just
okay.
taken, just stuck them on a piece of paper. I've those in particular I've come across, but there are a lot of earlier issues of Guyana that have the hand dabbing, you know, with the magic marker on it and so on, which are not listed in Scott. And so I assume we're in the same category.
Well, it depends what year. Scott lists some of the more recent ones from.
Yeah, well, these are some of the flower issues from I don't remember the year, but they're back in the early 80s.
Well, but
they seem to be being used on current correspondence.
Yeah,
but I don't have. Usually, the cancels are not readable. Or
yeah,
there's just a pen cancel or something like that. Some similar things to these from Mozambique I've encountered. I've submitted a number of these things over time to Scott, and some of them are now listed in Scott.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
But Mozambique seems to do the same type of thing as well.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's good to know. But if you wanted to send me scans of what you're looking at, because even the earlier stuff, because they did the handover printing was done, and they used stamps from all different eras. They went back to the early 60s for some of it.
Well, that's what I'm assuming. They dug things out of the vault.
Yeah, they dug them all out. The post office was grumbling about the whole thing.
Because
what?
Well, there'll be a printed revaluing, and then even that
gets crossed out.
I've seen being blotted out.
Yeah. That's what happens.
It's been very, very interesting. First time I've joined the group for this. I'll certainly be joining in again.
Good.
I was prompted by the subject matter because since I'm able to hold some of these things in my little fingers.
No, that's good. So yeah, send me some of that stuff, and I'll let you know where I think it fits.
I will try to do that. Yes.
Yeah. You have my details, so I'll
I think I included them in the closing email also, Steve.
Okay.
And by all means, if you send us a note, we will pass anything on to Steve. And fill them, you'll find them. So, Michael, you have a question?
Yes, greetings from New Zealand. I was just wondering, Steve, if some of these overprints covered two eras of currency. Like in New Zealand in 1967, we went to decimal currency from pounds, shillings, and pence, but they tended to use the same design, but they printed a new issue with the denomination on. Have you got any information or examples of where they've done this local overprinting?
Are you talking about New Zealand now?
I'm talking about anywhere really. Pacific Islands, for instance, have they gone? Tonga, I think they moved to a different currency somewhere along the line. Did they overprint? Have you seen local overprints of the change in currency?
No, they tend not to do that. They tend to have it printed out because it's kind of official. I think the initial overprints would be done by the postal authority. That they'd have, they say that becoming independent, then they'd have they get sets printed by the government printery, or whoever is handling the crown agents, or whoever was handling the stamps at the time. I was thinking about, we were talking before about when do the stamps become invalid? A lot of the countries don't like to make their stamps invalid, particularly because if someone has a stamp, they don't want to have to go to the counter and say that it's no longer valid. Although in Dominica, there's a certain, the definitive is only good for 5 years plus a year, and after that, it's no good. They put stamp not valid. So go figure that out. But I'm not sure I'm really answering your question, but I don't know of any.
I was just thinking of the incident in Tonga where they ran out of stamps. And
They just ran out of stamps. They didn't.
Create.
They just ran out. That's all. They weren't changing from one currency to another. I think that'd be a nightmare trying to figure it out. At a local level. A real accounting headache.
Yeah.
Steve, there are quite a few countries in Europe that regularly invalidate their stamps after a certain period. I think Holland and the Netherlands for two. Holland and Germany for two, to name major countries. I think their stamps are basically invalidated after 5 years. And from the post office's point of view, that's a pretty lucrative thing because, of course, as you were saying before, everybody in the trade likes to use old stamps for postage and we can buy it at a discount. In those countries, the stamps are no longer other than wallpaper.
Yeah, but particularly when everybody went from the local currency to euro,
yes, that too.
Yeah, that didn't help. This also happened to the United Nations. When the United Nations said, okay, all the stamps older than 3 or 4 years old are invalid. Everybody who's walking around with all this postage from the United Nations, the value of all that went right down the tubes. So you can't use old stamps to mail your stuff from the UN anymore.
How far in advance do they announce the invalidations?
Sorry?
How far in advance do they announce the invalidations?
I think within 12 months is about it.
Okay, yeah. So there are no loose coils out there.
Not sure on that. I know Norfolk Island, for example, in the Pacific, recently stopped issuing their own stamps and the Australian Post Office took them over.
Right.
They're one of those sort of curious places that's a quasi country, shall we say. They issue stamps, but in fact, they've got an Australian postcode and they're part of Australia, unless you talk to one of the locals when they'll tell you they're independent. But their stamps are no longer valid. The stamps of 5 years ago are no longer valid because now the only ones that are valid are the ones that are issued by Australia Post and say Norfolk Island, Australia on them.
Or Australian stamps without that, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. I think Norfolk Island's a funny place. I mean, any place you go to where they take the key and they fuse it into the if you rent a car, the key for the ignition is fused into the key, into the slot, because if you lose the key, it's weeks before they can get a new one. So it's like, I think it's brilliant. It's just like, what a place.
The Norfolk Island Post Office now is just an Australia Post licensed post office. It sells largely Australian stamps. And last time I visited there, which is a few years ago now, but you really had to push them to get any Norfolk stamps out of them. And the postmarker said Norfolk Island, New South Wales, which it's not part of New South Wales. And the locals really resented it, and the fact that they'd lost their stamps to Australia Post.
Well, and so I'm sure they were not happy about that, but there was financial reasons that kind of like crept in there, right?
I'm Richard Moss again. We were talking about Germany invalidating the stamps. Now, I don't know what the situation is right now, but I always remember the very first thing I ever bought on the Del campsite in 2009. I got a letter from the dealer, and on the envelope there was a Euro stamp, a franc stamp, and an old franc stamp, which was pre-1958, and they were all still valid. And I don't know whether that situation still exists, but it's contrast with Germany, and that's very puzzling.
No, I think, with everybody went Euro, I think it kind of like went sideways.
Yes, but France appeared, I don't know whether it is the case now, but certainly in 2009, which is 8 years after the Euro came in, they were still using pre-1958 francs, where I think it was 100 times a franc was devalued it was changed in value by about 100 points, and I think it was 1958, something like that, whereas 100 francs became 1 franc. and we're still using those old 100 franc stamps.
As 1 franc or as 100 francs?
Yeah. Well, the old 100 franc stamp still counted as a franc, and
Okay,
the
well,
franc was
then
still
that's all right.
valid to be used with the euros.
Yeah.
And I found it quite funny, actually. 3 currencies on one cover.
That's interesting. Yeah, but there's other, the French colonies, the Pacific uses French, what's CFA, which is not the euro, but it's still a French currency. It's what's it, Centre franc? I don't remember what it's called, but
Central Pacific francs in English. I
yeah.
don't know what it
Thank
is
you.
in their language. The reality is, of course, that collectors over the years, and dealers too, have made a point of often using things on mail that they shouldn't under the post office regulations. And that happens around the world as we speak. And a lot of post offices, of course, are very vigilant about that, and a lot of them are not very vigilant about that. I'm not talking about actually forged stamps. I'm talking about things that are no longer valid or that never were valid, but people put them on an envelope and they get used anyway. I've seen collectors over the years that have used duty stamps and all sorts of strange things. And people today, certainly in our country, I see quite regularly people that have used old things or reused old things, and a lot of it does not get picked up. And if it does get picked up by the post office, of course, they charge you the extra charge, the postage due.
It's interesting. In St. Vincent, for example, these original stamps I showed you were intended for revenue use, and but since the post office at the time was still linked to the Treasury, wasn't considered independent. So if the money went to revenue, to Treasury, or went to the Philadelphia, it didn't matter too much. But over the years, since then, the post office has become a postal corporation. It's separate. It has to make its own money, and so it doesn't want to do anything with the revenue division anymore. And the philatelics and all their stamps are in one place, and the post office doesn't want any. The post office itself doesn't want any of those stamps being used in the post office. So if you want regular stamps, if you want any of the wallpaper stamps from St. Vincent, you got to go to Philatelic, but the post office won't let you mail them. You have to get a special dispensation from the post office to mail from half a dozen letters with Disney stamps on, because the post office uses only a handful of stamps on the mail. Everything's separate now. So you have to understand a little bit how the government is structured, or how the structure changes, and how who's paying for what. So in St. Vincent, that became very interesting.
To follow on from Tony's point, you have a very confusing situation in Australia. And to use the Norfolk Island stamps as an example, the Norfolk Island stamps that were issued by Australia Post after Australia Post took over the postal administration are valid for postage in Australia. The earlier ones produced by the Norfolk Island Postal Administration are not valid in Australia. And so a lot of collectors don't quite understand the difference. A lot of collectors, of course, will just use the old ones, even though that they know they're not valid. And the post office staff, well, I'm not sure what they would understand. But it's worse than that, because the same comments apply to Christmas Island and Cocos Island stamps. They used to be independent postal administrations at various times, and their stamps not valid in Australia, but they're also now all Australia Post issues. And it's it's been common for many years for people to use old Christmas Island stamps.
Yeah, on the mails.
In the mails, and I haven't seen any of them picked up on any covers I've got from dealers or collectors over the years. And Cocos was a bit even more peculiar in that the first issues of Cocos were valid in Australia, and then they were not valid, and now they're valid again. So how anyone would understand any of that? At least the more recent issues of Cocos Christmas and Norfolk all say, Cocos Islands Australia, Norfolk Island Australia, or Christmas Island Australia. But the earlier Cocos issues that were valid in Australia just said Coke is killing Ireland.
Right, right.
It's all very confusing.
I was thinking that if I was a collector and I was going to use a stamp I knew needed valid, I would just make sure that there was a valid stamp of the correct value on the envelope, so they can say, "Oh, okay, this envelope's good. You just decided to put a little bit extra piece of wallpaper on it."
Yeah, oftentimes the people just put the value on the stamps based, with Cocos, Australian, Christmas, whatever, and they don't worry about whether they're valid or not. There are valid stamps on it, but they're not to the full value.
Steven, just one additional question. So on those overprints, I'm assuming that they have some validity from certain period of time. What happens when the period of time goes away? You're not supposed to be using them. Are the post office giving opportunity to people to exchange those overprints with new values, or they're not giving those opportunities?
It's unclear to me, but I typically think that the overprint is just available, and post office has got a stack of sheets. When they run out of that stack of sheets, they go to the next stack of sheets that the headquarters drops off there, and then they go through that. And if it's an overprint, it's an overprint. If it's not an overprint, it's not an overprint. And if you held on to it for a while, I don't think they'd care. But why would you? You're not going to leave it at home because it's only if you're tropical, certainly, it's just going to get. You want to use the stamps quickly before they kind of get glued to each other. You got a couple of months, I think.
Okay.
That's what I think. I think every country's a little different, but there'd be no reason for them to invalidate the overprinted stamps. I haven't noticed that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I see all the comments.
I have one last question. The document you had, the order to was it overprint on the stamps?
Yeah.
All right. Have you ever come in a situation where you have the document, it's important, but because of ethical reasons, because of a relationship, you don't use it until you can't use it right now because there's a relationship that you would damage by using it?
This stuff is a good question. The answer is yes. I have, and that document I doctored, so you can't see certain information on it for that very reason. Because I don't presume anybody's job. I don't presume anybody's business. I don't want to. I wouldn't want the printer reader, for example, to get into trouble. For some, me, I'm messing around with stamps. I don't want to get anybody, it's just stamps to me, but it's just other people, it's their livelihood. They're in a printing business. They don't want to lose their contract from the government. So it's like, I'm careful. I have some printing documents from a couple of countries, a couple more from St. Vincent. I think I have something from Malawi. But it's not. It stays here.
And do you keep any of these documents and with the thought that there's no real value on them will be later on, and store and are specifically store these things thinking they will be of value later?
Well, the value now, because they help document what's there.
Yeah.
I know they're real. I get those and I look at the stamp side, so I know they're real. Whether anybody else chooses to believe me or not, up to them. I have, and sometimes I send the information to catalogs. Although it's even then, I don't because you look at those things from St. Vincent. Well, some of them are overprinted. Some of those stamps I haven't seen. Maybe they use the 10 centers and they send them down to the Treasury office and they're on the backs of everybody's I don't know, the phone bill or something. And so I haven't seen one used. So how do I know it's there? And my catalog talks about that.
Computer went wonky.
Yeah.
My catalog shows. Hey Keith. My catalog shows the requisitions I type it out so they don't, so you don't really see all the handwriting stuff. But you know, so most of it I'm able to document. Some I can't. And if I can't document, it's probably in, you know, in 15 made its way long ago to the waste baskets. And
I was thinking this. I'm sorry.
I try my job. I like to think of myself as very educated and very highfalutin and all that stuff. I'm really just collecting garbage.
Yeah. I was thinking specifically, I knew this guy down in Baltimore. He was a pot dealer and he had baseball cards and he had a limited amount of storage space. So he was careful what he kept in there because he didn't want to try and sell something that he wouldn't get, you know, that wouldn't pay for his storage space, basically.
I should talk to him. Because if you look at my website, you can kind of see the rows of boxes. I have over 1 million envelopes sitting on a shelf. That's a lot of envelopes.
Yeah. Thank you, though. Thank you, Dan.
No, sure.
That was fantastic. So any more questions for Steve, or are we going to go and eat dinner?
I'm going to have morning tea.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, Tony's going to have morning tea. Tony's going to have morning tea with his bourbon.
I had dinner. I had dinner before the talk. But I would note that mail from New York to Barry's Bay, Ontario was taking about a month. In the days of the railways, I think it was about a week.
Yes, I know. Hi, Duncan. How are you?
Hi.
Yeah, no, I think we do better to putting it on a clipper. You know, it'll make it around faster than it would by airmail.
Steve, I'm just thinking as a closing comment from me that if you're a collector of British Guyana, the 1 cent magenta sold earlier this year for 9.5 million or whatever it was. You've got stamps that are almost that rare.
I do. Yeah, but you know,
I understand your pricing problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like some of those Tongan stamps. You know, how do you figure that out? You know, so it's just they sit in a drawer.
But interesting, I was considering putting on a program on the British Guyana because Bob Scott did a lot of research on that. And I thought it might be fun to have him on to talk about that. And then we'll compare new issue and old issue. See what it says. He has a sense of humor. But it is fascinating.
Steve, just a closing comment on Norfolk Island. When I did visit, I did start talking to a woman on the island. And
we heard about that.
Why were you there? And she sort of mentioned that I mentioned I was a stamp collector, and she turned out she'd worked for their philatelic bureau and their post office. And then she got very emotional, of course, that you know, the Australian Post Office had taken over their stamps. And
I'm sure they feel very.
What happened was in Norfolk was that it was self-governing with its own legislative assembly, but the Australian government has turned it into a directly administered territory, and then outsourced the various services. And at the moment, they're all fighting about who's going to run their schools, because the federal government doesn't run schools, and they're trying to contract it out to one of the states. And no one wants to do it. So we've got similar issues with the post office. And the old post office staff were all sacked because they let the contract for the local post office, they put it out to contract, and it went to someone else other than the people who've been involved in running the post office previously.
I'm sorry to interrupt on this one, but isn't it the case with Norfolk Island that Norfolk Island went bankrupt? They were very much reliant from memory, and there was an article on this in Pacifica, in Pacific Island Study Circle. From memory, they relied very heavily on cruise liners, and as the cruise liners got bigger, they found that they couldn't actually get anybody ashore, and that was one of the main reasons why they went bankrupt. Now, I'm not absolutely certain about that, but if anybody wants to look that up, I believe there is an article in Pacifica all about it.
You are right in that the reason why the Australian government did remove self-government in the Legislative Assembly was, I'm not sure if the island actually went bankrupt or whether it was about to. But there's Tony might know, but there's not a lot of difference. Essentially, their finances were such. Wasn't only the cruise ships. It was also, of course, many years ago they made a lot of money out of stamps. Well, that was no longer the case. There wasn't the money to be made philately as once upon a time. But there were other issues in terms of the way the Legislative Assembly were managing the island, and the other main industry is tourism.
Well, you know, it's interesting talking about the modern stamps and the actual need, because whereas at one point, you know, they were printing 20 and 30,000 of a set. Now they only maybe need 2,000 or 3,000 to mail letters. But in some places, you know, you still need the stamps because you can't, you know, if you don't have electricity, the internet isn't working correctly. If the electricity goes down, particularly in the African countries, you know, in Zambia, the power is on for 8 hours a day. And then it really whacks out your ability to communicate on the internet. And so people still have to mail letters. Maybe not to the same extent they did before. You know, so but, you know, I think because of the internet and the fact that the island, there's been a decreasing, the need for the post office for letters has decreased, but I think parcels have become much more important. You know, I think around the board, you'll see that a lot of the post offices, I was in the Bermuda post office behind the counter, and they were showing me all the PO boxes of everybody who's gone off island. I said, what do you mean? I said, all these people are not here anymore. I said, that's a third of the PO boxes. And this, I don't remember, what it was, St. George's, I think. And I said, what's all this in the middle of the floor? I said, oh, these are all the parcels. So everybody that's come in, and we have no place to store them, so we store them in the middle of the floor. And so you realize that, you know, the changing needs of the post offices require, you know, perhaps rethinking how the buildings are being used. Maybe letters are less important, so you need higher value stamps. And so we as collectors say, you know, why is Tonga issuing a $200 stamp? Why is Samoa issuing a $200 stamp? Well, the reason is they're sending parcels everywhere, and you're not going to put a whole pile of those 10-cent stamps that you saw before on a big package. There's have to be a really big package to handle just the stamps. You know, so you start to think about, you know, the changing needs. And the Samoan postmaster told me yesterday that she made around to all the 6 offices in Samoa, and was looking at you know, construction. And I don't know why, but I assume it has something to do with this change of need, you know, letters being less so, and where do you store big parcels, you know, until people come call for them, you know. But that's, and so we're just looking at the stamps, but they're trying to run a country, and I think that's kind of the interesting part. And I don't think a lot of them are looking to the stamp collectors anymore.
No, the money's not there.
To try to make monies, and I think a lot of the post office, you know, a lot of the, anyway, that's enough said on that.
I was just going to say, I understand that the US has just suspended many types of mail service to Australia.
Yeah, I just mailed a letter to Australia on Saturday, and just as I gave it to the clerk, and she stamps it and puts it in the bin, a woman comes up and goes, okay, everybody, let me just tell you what's going on here. There are 2 countries that mail has been suspended, Mayotte, and she'd say, Mayotte? Oh, where the hell is that? Nobody knew. Anyway, and I wasn't, and I think I told them, oh, it's Indian Ocean somewhere. And she says, in Australia. And she listed all the different services to Australia that are being stopped. I don't know how long for. I guess that's something to do, maybe Australia.
American Airlines has suspended their flights. For the immediate reason. Sydney, Melbourne are in complete lockdown, and the number of flights coming to the country have been reduced.
So that's probably why.
That's probably not going to change, I suspect, for 2 or 3 months.
Oh man!
Oh.
So you can't even
all COVID? All COVID related?
Yeah, COVID.
Oh,
wow.
Canberra is in lockdown as well, but we don't have international flights. Steve, do you know if any services are operating? Sorry, are any services still working, like international Priority Express or?
I think DHL maybe.
Uh,
Well,
yeah,
I'm just
no,
saying,
DHL probably is because they use their own planes
yeah, and maybe FedEx.
and FedEx.
I know this, for example, from Zambia. You want to get the mail will sit there and not go anywhere. However, you want a DHL package? Fine, shows up in 2 days.
I
What
had
about New
a,
Zealand?
I don't know. I just put the letter in the mail and it gets through. May take a month.
I had an eBay purchase arrive from Argentina that was posted in October last year.
Yeah, I know.
About 2 weeks ago.
In Kiribati, for example, I have a package sitting on the wharf since March. Hopefully, it's not the wharf. Maybe it's just me being figurative. I hope so. Otherwise, it'll be a very wet package when I get it.
It's global warming. It's just coming up half an inch every year, Steve. You know, eventually it's going to be
That's
underwater.
right,
The
that's right.
package.
Have any of these experiments with the overprinting, resulted in post offices looking at their backlog of wallpaper and saying, let's just see if, let's not try and go, let's not just, spend all that time overprinting, et cetera, et cetera. There's some guy's willing to buy the whole room for 10 cents on the dollar. Let him have it, and we'll just do what we got and call it a day.
Okay, a couple of comments about that. Somebody buys it for 10 cents on the dollar. What are they going to do with those stamps? Well, they're going to sell it to somebody else in the country to use it for postage. So you have to invalidate those stamps. Because otherwise you can create yourself, you as the government trying to get rid of all this waste is really creating a pickle for yourself. I think Papua New Guinea did that. And I think they learned to regret it. But
Papua New Guinea did it actually with their banknotes as well. They recently sold all their banknote stock, which is just extraordinary because they've always been a relatively hard currency. I mean, in Australia anyway, they're a currency you'd be able to still cash at a bank, albeit that they've got inflation and all sorts of problems.
yeah, they have things there now. Yeah.
But one of the interesting stories I know is with the island of Nui. Some years ago, a New Zealand dealer, Willie Carson, who some of you might know, Willie
yes.
was
I was
having a
thinking about
holiday
that.
over there, and he basically bought their stock for exactly as one of the other listeners just said, for something like 10 cents in the dollar. I don't know what he paid, but he bought their entire stock. And I think a week later or something, they had a cyclone that basically flattened the island, and they had no stock. So he actually sold some back to the post office because they didn't have any stamps. It's a true story. He'd be very happy to tell you over a beer, or a whiskey indeed, Steve.
For Willie, it's a beer.
He must have had advance warning that cyclone was coming.
It was timing's everything, as they say.
No, but it's interesting also because some of those stamps, the post office wouldn't let me use because in their minds they demonetized them.
Ah, okay.
Maybe not that particular series. I suspect Willie probably went back to the well more than once, but so they may not want to announce that they demonetized it. It may not be something they're going to publicize. Not so much Nui, but any country might think along those lines. Who's Edward? Well, you were saying before there was another comment I wanted to make on that. You were. I'm trying to remember now.
Well, you started to answer it with saying that if you have a room full of stamps,
okay, that's it. Yeah, room full of stamps. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I will. But now I remember now. You have a pile of stamps, and you think, well, how am I going to get? I'm going to ask my printer to print a sheet of stamps. It's going to have a dollar value on it, and they're going to charge me 60 cents. What's the point of that? What am I making out of this? Why am I doing anything? If I'm trying to print it, put just to mail a local letter, why? I'm throwing money in the garbage can. But if they can get the local printer to do it cheap, and maybe maybe you know them, maybe they're a relative, or maybe it's just a local business. that's, rather give them the business and have the printer do it in the United States. I think St. Vincent, for example, they decided they had all these old stamps rotting away. Let's use them. They looked at it as money, as a financial instrument and a liability, and burning them probably was more of a security issue than anything. How do you know you're going to burn them? How do you know that the top layer won't burn and the bottom half goes someplace else? And that's, and so it's a problem, and I don't know why Fiji would overprint stamps 1 penny. It's just, why would you do such a thing? So the collectors can buy stamps? I don't know.
Well, there is a famous story about one of the very early Fiji stamps, because they issued one of the very first issue. They overprinted them 1 cent, and they suddenly found they got a requirement for 2 cents, and so the printer was asked to do the stamps all over again with 2 cents on. So he looked at his sheet and thought, I've done this on the computer. All I've got to do is change wherever it's got 1x, which is the x is the obliterator. Wherever it's got 1x, I've got to change 1x to 2x. So he instructed the computer to overprint everything 2x. But what he forgot about was that in one position on the sheet, it was actually 1 blank x. So the result was that you got a sheet of 2 cents with 1 stamp in the middle of it with 1x on it.
Right. There's a lot of that with the Fiji overprints. It's a minefield in a good day. Trying to find some of those errors. You wouldn't find that used really, because it'd be too.
No.
Yeah, it'd be too hard to source that.
No, only if you found a pair.
Right, and good luck at that.
Very low chance of that.
Yeah.
Steve, do you know if the British Indian Ocean Territory is still going to issue stamps after the UPU decision?
I don't know, but the post office tells me they're still alive.
Sorry, they're still
there.
They're still there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they're issuing any new stamps, and I think that decision came out after I spoke to them.
Do you ever see many covers from
I
BIOT?
have a couple on my website.
Okay.
I'm trying to get more now.
Yeah.
But the package I sent out about 2 months ago will probably take another 2 months to get there. So we'll see.
Most of the mail presumably be military mail.
Actually, can't you?
What is this story about? Because I didn't follow it.
Okay, so the British Indian Ocean Territories, otherwise Shelbros Archipelago, was administered from Mauritius when Mauritius was a territory of the United Kingdom. When Mauritius was granted independence, the British declared it a separate territory and wouldn't allow it to go with Mauritius. And they called it the British Indian Ocean Territory. It's better well known probably to Americans as Diego Garcia, which is a big US military base. And in order to build the military base, the Brits moved all the population off to Mauritius. And ever since then, they've been fighting to get their home back. And they've had court cases in the United Kingdom in order to try to force the British to let them back in. But of course, the Brits are not going to do that when you've got a major military base there, both for the British, but also for the US. As part of, obviously, the Mauritian government's been lobbying for a long time, and they had some success recently with the Universal Postal Union, the UPU. The UPU declared that Mauritian stamps have to be used from Diego Garcia and the Shelbros Archipelago, and the BIOT stamps are no longer recognised by the UPU, and therefore on the international mails. So I was just curious as to whether they were still going to be issued and what they were actually going to use on the islands and what would happen with it.
I think it's a moving target. We'll find out.
Yes.
Proofs in the pudding.
I would have thought there would be a lot of mail anyway, other than the military mail that presumably go through the American and the British field offices.
Yeah, I know about the American offices. I know about the British field offices. but I guess they are British field offices. I get the APO mail from the U.S. Post Office there, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, it's mainly an American base, but
Yeah.
They also issued for a while under Zirinsky Seychelles or some such. I don't think the
ZES.
pronunciation's quite right, but let's just say that's what it was.
Oh, yes, yes.
In
But
the
was it the same-
1980s, they changed their
I don't
name for a
think
while to that.
was that the same place?
Yes. No,
I
no.
think so. No?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, no.
No, I think there's more with some of the smaller Ks of Seychelles.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Silly question. Can't you shred sheets of stamps? I bought for $30 a printer that's better than what they had in the embassy, U.S. Embassy in Tehran because it cross-cuts.
I guess the fear is that, you know, someone can just spend the time and assemble $2 to spend weeks trying to reassemble $2 sheets of stamps.
I've got another Norfolk Island story on that subject. When we were there in 2001 or 2, I think, Norfolk Island prepared some stamps for the Sydney Olympics, and they had a lot of famous people on them that were unauthorized, and they were unauthorized use of their photos. So they had people like Serena Williams playing a tennis shot, and they'd prepared these stamps for issue, and it was brought to their attention by lawyers that, you know, if they did that, they'd be sued by the various high profile people who were identifiable on the stamps. So they shredded them all. And when we were there on the island, we were told by, was it Gil, I can't remember that, Gil Hitch, who was the postmaster at the time. He said, oh, they've been shredded, and he said they've been used as mulch on various rose bushes around the island, but we won't tell you which ones.
I found out a little bit about that Seychelles issue. It was an issue for 1, 2, 3. According to Gibbons, it was an issue for 1, 2, 3, 4 islands, which was served by a travelling post office.
Okay.
It was a ship called the MV Saint-Juin, 5th of June. And it served those islands, and those were the islands that they used those stamps on.
Right. Thank you.
Aldabra was one of them. Aldabra was the famous one.
For the turtles.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yeah, curious that Norfolk Island is using Australia Post when most of my mail from Australia comes from International Postal Service and gets cancelled in Singapore and takes 8 weeks to get from Australia to Canada.
Oh.
That's pretty quick. But, you know, there's another subject I was thinking about for today. I was talking about junk mail. You know, how everybody gets junk mail. Well, the people in Germany get junk mail. What post office sends it? Does it come from? Well, the Pacific Islands thought, okay, this is Tonga, this is Samoa. I don't think Tonga, but certainly Samoa and certainly the Solomon Islands. I thought, okay, we'll do. They call it bulk mailing, right? And so, you know, I guess they mailed a whole pile of things off. It has all, you know, they have the Solomon Island postage paid in indicia on it, with all different styles and different all these. So it's printed to postal stationery. Ah, Ian, there we go. I can actually come up with something that you like.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, but they make a few cents on it. Oh, they're terrific. We mail it out, and maybe we don't have to, maybe they get mailed out from someplace else, and we don't have to worry about it. But then at some point, the post office go, oh shit, all this stuff gets returned to sender, and then they get huge piles of mail back in the GPOs, and they don't know what to do. They're like swimming in it. Vanuatu. They said, we're swimming in it. Anyway, so you know, it's when the little islands think they have a sure shot on something, and it doesn't go the way they think. You know, there's a catch that we weren't aware of. Because when you're on an island and you get a whole room full of returned mail, junk mail, you're on an island. It doesn't go. Where do you put it? Under your mattress? You know what happens to it? That's a subject for another day.
This is fantastic. Okay, anything else? Or are we gonna let Steve go? Keith, shush. I have to feed the dog and Keith, but
What's that?
no, I have to feed both animals in the house.
You keep them both on a leash?
We won't comment. He's in the room. No, actually, he's,
You're talking about the four-legged one.
Anyway, this is great. I mean, for me, I looked at it and I was like, wow, now I start understanding what happened like years and years and years ago in the 1800s. It's like
the same thing now.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's wonderful.
No different.
So, all right.
Well, thank you, everybody. John, it's nice to see you in England. It's pretty late over there.
Hi, Steve. Yes, it's 1:15 in the morning.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Hi, John.
John.
Hi, Richard.
That was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you.
Thank you, everybody. It's
Thanks for